Today on Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, the Seahawks add not one, but two inside linebackers to the mix. One coming back from injury, Jerome Baker on the practice field today for the first time. The other acquired via trade, Mike Jackson being sent to the Carolina Panthers for Michael Barrett. If that name sounds familiar, you may have heard me talk about him on this channel. He was a focal point of many mock drafts all throughout the draft season. I'll tell you how he fits onto this roster and how he might impact my 53-man roster prediction. I've been promising you for about a week and a half that I would update that. I was able to do it today with the Barrett edition. How does that impact some of the decisions the Seahawks may have ahead of them on the 53-man roster? Also, Mike Macdonald today revealed what we're going to see Saturday in the final preseason game at home against Cleveland as far as starters playing or not. All that coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Hey, if you sign up for your BetUS account today using the link down below, they'll give you a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Check out BetUS at the link below. And, of course, hit that thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notification of future episodes. Quick update. I announced on the last show that Seahawks Forever will be joining the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Really excited about that move. Get to join a lineup that includes guys like Chris Long and Cam Newton, J.R. Smith on the NBA side, Michael Sean Dugar, who covers the Seahawks for The Athletic, also on the network. But just wanted to let you know how that might impact some of you and some differences you may see in the show. If you watch on YouTube, shouldn't notice a difference at all. I might have an ad read or two to add to the show, but it shouldn't impact your viewing experience at all. However, if you listen on the audio side, while the transfer takes place, it takes a couple of days. And so this episode in particular may be caught in the ether a little bit, where you may get it a day or two late because the transfer is happening now, moving from one hosting platform to the other. Otherwise, if you subscribe to the show now and you listen to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Amazon Music, it should just automatically still show up in your library. You may, if you can't find it automatically after a couple of days, have to search for it again and resubscribe, but I don't think that'll happen. The one big impact is for those of you who subscribed through Spotify in order to get ad-free episodes, that option no longer exists. And so that ad-free option will no longer exist. If you were subscribing, your subscription ends today. You won't be billed anymore. You just won't get access to those ad-free episodes. I apologize for that. But I do have plans at some point in the near future to establish a Patreon program where monthly membership fee gets you ad-free access to everything that I do. That work is underway. Stay tuned for more details on that. Lots and lots of news today. And if you follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, you may have seen me tweet out earlier today that, of course, this had to happen on a day I decided to sleep in. I wake up to Scott Service being fired by the Mariners, the Michael Barrett trade, other information coming out from Mike Macdonald today. And I made a joke that I wouldn't be able to react to it right away. But I switched some things around in my schedule, and here we are. First of all, the acquisition of Michael Barrett. That is kind of front and center the news today. We'll get to that in just a moment, and then I'll show you how it fits into my 53-man roster projection. But Macdonald gave some clarity on what we're going to see at Lumen Field, the Seahawks' one and only home preseason game against the Cleveland Browns this Saturday at 7 o'clock Pacific time. He says, we will see the starters. And he spoke about it in terms of, we're going to see all the starters, at least those that are healthy and not nursing some sort of injury. He said how long we're going to see the starters, how much we're going to see them is going to depend on individual plans for each of them. I would imagine just at first blush that I would think that might mean the interior offensive line spots, those guard spots where there's so much competition, Lake and Tomlinson on the left side Anthony Bradford on the right side, Christian Haynes competing at both spots. McClendon Curtis still maybe figuring into that competition. As he was the right guard one all through OTAs and early training camp until they kicked him out, or mini camps, and then kicked him out to right tackle with the questions about Abe Lucas's health there. That we might see those guys a little bit longer because they need to see more from those guys, and whether Haynes might be ready as a rookie to step up week one and earn that starting spot. So maybe we'll see those guys a little bit longer. He did say we'll see Geno Smith. Is it going to be a series? 2 series, a quarter? We'll see. And then I think he would give way and we would see a lot more of Sam Howell throughout the rest of the game. In fact, it wouldn't even surprise me if we don't even see PJ Walker at all in this game. Maybe we see Geno for a quarter and a half, 3-4 drives. And then Sam Howell plays the rest of the way because you got to get him ready in the event anything happens to Geno Smith. You know, I don't think getting PJ Walker any reps right now does any good. So we'll see how that goes. Now, Jerome Baker returning to the practice field today. So for the first time today, we got to see Terrell Dodson, Jerome Baker running side by side as the starting inside linebackers. Now, are we going to see Baker at all on Saturday? I would be surprised. With just 1 week of practice under his belt and coming off a soft tissue injury, I would be shocked if we saw him at all. And it's a great opportunity to get more reps for 4th round draft pick Tyrese Knight at that spot. And so I don't think we'll see Baker. I'd be surprised. What about a guy like Draymond Jones, who's been banged up, nursing an injury? Is he able to practice 100% this week? Again, I think that's one where the risk outweighs the benefit of playing him at all. So maybe we don't see him. Maybe guys who have had really good preseasons. Like a Mike Morris, who technically isn't a starter right now, but is going to figure prominently in that defensive line rotation. He got nicked up coming out of the Titans game. Maybe out of precaution, they just don't give him any reps on Saturday because they've seen enough. We'll see. Still waiting for news on Cam Young and whether he's going to be able to figure into that defensive line rotation. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at the roster in a bit. But first of all, let's talk about Michael Barrett. So this is one of those trades that I love. And I think you're going to see more of these over the next 7 to 8 days around the league as we get closer to cut down date, which is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I think officially maybe it's Sunday and then Monday is waiver day and Tuesday you set your rosters. I'd have to double check that. But by Tuesday, certainly by this time next week, we'll know at least what the Seahawks initial 53-man roster looks like. And as teams begin to do that and start to evaluate making those cuts and protecting young players they want to protect, some of those bubble guys, you have to make the determination, can this guy get through waivers? I want to keep him. Can we get him to the practice squad safely? There is a thought that because it's just one big cut now, it's essentially a massive new wave of free agency where there used to be incremental cuts, that it's easier to get guys through waivers. And that as a rule, teams don't make as many claims during that time. But they certainly do. And the Seahawks are an example of that. Last year, we saw it on a number of fronts. At the cut and in the few days after that, as teams set their practice squads, the Seahawks claimed Drake Thomas, Raekwon O'Neal, and McClendon Curtis, acquired them all in that way by giving them 53-man roster spots and poaching them off of practice squads of other teams. That could happen. So as teams begin to evaluate that and what the strengths and weaknesses of their roster is or are, hey, maybe we can give you one of our guys from a position of strength, and you have a guy to give us from your depth that we think fits a more immediate need. Perfect example of that here. I think Mike Jackson is a very, very solid NFL player, a lot of starting experience, a lot of upside, a lot of strengths. He's affordable. He's a guy that I thought when Mike Macdonald was hired might fit really well into what he does, a physical player. But then the Seahawks went out and acquired, 2 additional corners in this year's draft to go along with some of the outstanding quality they already had at the position. And so Jackson on a 1-year non-guaranteed deal was expendable, but had value I completely would have expected them to get something for him instead of just having to cut him. I was thinking maybe you'd bring a late round draft pick. But getting a player who may have an impact on your roster is much better value. Now, Bennett was drafted in the 7th round by the Carolina Panthers this last season. And again, I mentioned at the top that he's a guy that you might recognize the name for a bunch of reasons. He played at Michigan, so Mike Macdonald knows him, had that 1 year with him. Jay Harbaugh, who coached special teams at Michigan under his brother Jim, or his uncle Jim, right? Uncle, is very familiar with him. And Bennett is a guy that fills a need. He was a player that I had mocked as a day 3 pick to the Seahawks many, many times, sometimes double dipping at the linebacker position because we knew it was such a need heading into the draft. So let's give you the book on Michael Barrett, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how he fits. His profile is so interesting. In high school, he played quarterback. This is a guy that was a dual threat quarterback and actually was named Georgia State 7A Class Player of the Year his senior year. His last 2 years in high school, check these numbers out. He passed for almost 4,500 yards and 43 touchdowns through the air, and ran for another 2,500 yards and 34 touchdowns on the ground. Dynamic dual threat quarterback. Went to Michigan, started out as kind of a hybrid outside linebacker safety type. Played sparingly during the year that Macdonald was there, but really blossomed in the 2 years after under Jesse Minter. And he's one of those guys, he turns 25 in December. He's one of those older players, or they used to be called overage players, but we've talked about this before. Does that matter? No, not this year, because he's one of those guys that took advantage of the COVID exceptions and ended up playing 6 years, all at Michigan. He is the all-time winningest player in Michigan history. He's been part of 61 wins during his time there. Very, very productive in those last 2 years. 115 solo tackles, 208 combined, 8.5 sacks, one of the most efficient pass rushers in college football. We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. 2 interceptions. 1 was a pick 6. 12 tackles for loss, 4 forced fumbles. 3 of those came in his final year. He was a team captain on a roster full of captains, on a massively talented roster. What was it? 18 Michigan Wolverines competed at the Combine this year, all-time record. He was a captain among captains. Tons and tons of elite in that group. He was certainly one of them. So why did he drop to the 7th round then, Dan? Shade under 6 foot, 5'11" and a third, if you want to get specific, 233 pounds. As you look through the scouting reports, you see a lot of references to how undersized he is. But we also talked heading into the draft about how this may be more of the norm now moving forward. The coverage is such an important element now of what teams look for from their inside linebackers that, getting that 6'1", 245-pound inside linebacker, those guys aren't going to come along very often. We saw some of them in the draft last year. We talked about them, guys like Nathaniel Watson, but they also went day 3 because at that size, the athletic ability and the ability to cover isn't what teams are looking for these days. Didn't test great at the Combine, didn't do full testing, was recovering from an injury, wasn't able to do all of the drills. And if you look at RAS score, and we quoted a lot on here, you're not going to like this deal. I think his RAS score was under 5, but a lot of that was because of some of the drills he couldn't run. He had a poor short shuttle score, and then it was being under height, underweight for the ideals of the position. I feel like those ideals need to be updated a little bit. But Michael Barrett is one of those guys that I've already seen some stuff today from some analysts that there are times when scouts and coaches aren't on the same page. And Barrett might be a guy that scouts don't love because he doesn't have those measurables, but coaches love him more. And he is a tape darling. Tried to find it again this morning. I apologize that I couldn't because I wanted to give credit for the exact name, but one of the analysts, it might have been, I feel like it might have been Lance Zierlein. Lance last year, or Chad Ryder, both from NFL Network. I think it was one of those guys. We're talking about, might have been Daniel Jeremiah. Okay, I've made the point. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but that I remember this during draft season, that Michael Barrett's tape against Alabama last year was teaching tape for how to play inside linebacker, and the best linebacker performance they had seen on tape the entire season from any of those guys. Another analyst said, when you're watching Junior Colson tape, who was taken in the second round as a much younger player and seen to be much bigger, faster, stronger, seen to be by most the consensus better prospect, that Michael Barrett made it hard to watch Junior Colson tape because you're trying to watch Colson and you keep seeing Barrett stand out. A couple of things here. Dane Brugler, who writes for The Athletic and produces the Beast scouting report every year, had not as bullish on Barrett as some of the other outlets. Had him ranked as his 20th ranked linebacker. For reference point, he had Tyrese Knight 14th. He says, overall, Barrett doesn't have the size teams desire in base and lacks playmaking reaction time, but he plays fast and physically with a forceful demeanor. This is a common thread you're going to see throughout these scouting reports. He is a bargain bin version of the Kansas City Chiefs' Nick Bolton. Another thing that scouts will talk about is what a demon Barrett is on special teams. And that helps explain, I had mentioned the connection earlier with Jay Harbaugh. And certainly just the Harbaugh brothers, John and Jim, too. If you can bring special teams value, that's going to help you in other areas. And it's going to give you a place on a roster for certain. Barrett also, the first thing I thought of when I saw this news today was, well, Griffin and Maddie from Seattle Overload podcast are certainly going to be happy with this move. Barrett was, I think, Griffin Sturgeon's 5th ranked linebacker. Thought he was a perfect Seahawk fit. Thought he was great in coverage and against the run. Matty Brown felt similarly. Sure enough, those guys are really, really happy with this move for what it ended up costing the Seahawks. Griffin says, my favorite thing about Barrett is his spot dropping. Elite sense there. But I think his most impressive trait is his play strength in the box. Daniel Jeremiah says, if he would have run a little bit faster, he ran that 4.7 flat 40, he would have been drafted higher. He is a stat stuffer. Had 3 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, really, really quick hands, can play off blocks even at his size. Thought he played faster than that 40 time. Thought he could also cover running backs as well. That's from Daniel Jeremiah. And then got quite a bit of great stuff from Corbin Smith today at Corbin Smith NFL. If you want to check it out on Twitter, or go to All Seahawks and read this entire piece. Just some of the things from Corbin. He says, while Barrett didn't test very well at the combine with below average results in the vertical jump and short shuttle, and lacks prototypical linebacker size, which inevitably led him to not being selected until the 7th round, he compensates for those deficiencies with a physical play style and a high football IQ. He calls him a capable run defender. Says he's one of college football's most productive blitzing linebackers over the past several seasons, a key characteristic of a Macdonald defense. Per Pro Football Focus, he finished with 16 pressures on just 46 rush attempts and led all qualified linebackers with a 31.1% win percentage on blitzes, earning himself a top-ranked 93.8 pass rushing grade last season. Goes on to say, despite not being a great athlete by any means, Barrett also excelled in coverage for the Wolverines, proving himself reliable, dropping back into zones. He allowed under 7 yards per reception and only 1 touchdown while intercepting 2 passes and generating a pair of pass breakups with quarterbacks posting under a 76.3 passer rating when targeting him. That courtesy of Corbin Smith. And then the other thing that has to appeal to Macdonald and that coaching staff about Michael Barrett, and this is a long-standing tradition in Seattle, going back to, certainly it was a marker of the Pete Carroll days. Michael Barrett's one of those guys, plays with a chip on his shoulder, always been counted out as undersized, not big enough. That drives him. His response to that is, I got a whole bag of chips. Again, I think this is a solid trade for both teams. The Panthers had a need for experienced depth at corner. They got J.C. Horn, obviously, on one side, but he's had injury issues. Dane Jackson is listed as the starter at the other spot, but he's battling some injuries this preseason. So our lads already has Mike Jackson listed at the as the second string the second stringer at left corner behind Dane Jackson. So it made sense for them. If you haven't checked out BetUS yet, this is what it looks like. This is what you're going to see. This is a look at the Seahawks and Browns matchup this Saturday at 7 o'clock Pacific time at Lumen Field. As you scroll down, you take a closer look at the game. You can see all of the different money lines. You can see historical information. You can see some of where the action is hot and cold. Right now, just a couple examples. Hot, the Browns are 6-1 in their last 7 games as a favorite. Cold, the Seahawks 0-4-2 against the spread in their last 6 games as a favorite. It goes over injury updates, anything that might impact the game, history between the two teams. You can check that out at the link down below. And if you sign up for an account with BetUS today, they'll give you 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Okay, so as promised, let's see how this might impact the Seahawks roster. Because already today, Seaside Joe, who you've seen on the show, which, by the way, congratulations to Joe today, the 2,000th consecutive day of releasing his Seahawks newsletter. That is beyond prolific, really impressive. Love the work he does and the insight with which he approaches his writing. He has already said today he thinks Michael Barrett's a practice squad player. So let's consider that when we take a look at how I think he fits into the roster, because he very well may be right. And his argument is that he doesn't think there would be any problem getting him through waivers to the practice squad. And so it made sense for them to make the switch because maybe Mike Jackson's a guy who would have been more likely to have been claimed. Or if they wanted to claim Michael Barrett, they may have lost out to another team. So this gives them kind of right of first refusal, in a sense, in trying to get him to the practice squad. Here is my updated 53-man roster. And I want to qualify this by saying this is my prediction on what I think they will do for the initial 53, not how I think it'll ultimately settle before the first game, because a lot of things can happen. And part of setting your 53 at first, as I said before, may sometimes have to do more with how likely you think it is that you can get someone through waivers versus not, and how much you want to protect that player, a developmental player maybe in some cases, over a player who might be able a little bit better today, but may pass through waivers a little more easily. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit in specific on the offensive line. First of all, in green here, you see the players that I have making the 53. Not a lot of surprises here, but a couple potentially. Quarterback, obviously, no question, Geno Smith, Sam Howell. They will not give a 53-man roster spot to PJ Walker. Will he be the guy that ends up on the practice squad, or will somebody be released by another team that they like better? We'll see. At running back, this one was tough, really one of the toughest ones. They have routinely kept 4 running backs in the past. Sometimes that has been Nick Bellore, kind of counted as a running back, even though he would never really play as a fullback. Really wrestled with this one because early in camp, it looked like George Holani had the lead for running back 3 status, and primarily because of his pass blocking ability. But McIntosh is the guy that's been the more dynamic runner in the preseason, really looked outstanding in both games, averaging 5 yards a carry. And while he has work to do in that third down pass blocking role, the coaches are raving about this guy. And when we saw this at Lumen Field in the joint practices, actually, at Tennessee, where Holani seemed to be running as the third running back in some of the 11-on-11 stuff in those padded practices. And yet when they went to hurry up, 2-minute offense, McIntosh was the guy. To me, that's telling. Now, they might keep 4 running backs and only, for example, 3 tight ends to start the season. Some of that may depend on Pharaoh Brown's injury status. Or is Noah Fant healthy? We haven't really seen him in the preseason. But where are you going to take that from if you keep a 4th running back? Are you going to only keep 5 receivers? I don't think so. Touch on that in a second. Are you going to keep 1 less offensive lineman? Certainly not, especially with Connor Williams coming off injury. You're going to take it from defense. I think they're going to go a little heavier defense. You can see from the breakdown here over on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got 26 being kept on defense and 24 on offense. Not an even split. My thought here is this. Running backs are so plentiful and available that George Holani, I don't think, is going to have any trouble getting through waivers and being on the practice squad. There are going to be so many young running backs on the waiver wire. Some of those are kind of pick your flavor, right? Different teams look for different qualities in running backs. Holani went undrafted for a reason. Teams have some concerns about his injury history. Most teams have 4th, 5th, 6th running backs on the roster right now, guys they like, guys who are familiar with their system. It doesn't make a lot of sense to go out and swap one of those guys out for someone new unless you really think Holani has like starter upside. I don't know for certain that he would have a better chance to go unclaimed than McIntosh. It just feels to me like the coaches like what they've seen out of McIntosh the last couple of weeks and the value he can bring, and that they're not going to keep 4 to start with. So we'll see. I could be wrong on that. Last year they kept 4. I think that seems to be the way that they go. But again, then I would ask you this, and I would love to hear this in the comments. If you're going to keep a 4th running back because you're afraid of losing one of these guys, where are you going to take that from? Now, wide receivers, and this might be your answer. I think the first 5 spots are locks, but I think they're going to keep 6. They have in the past. They did last year. Sometimes they've kept 7. Receiver has been one of those spots also where what we see on cut down day isn't what we see 3-4 days later. DK, Tyler, Jake Bobo, although Tyler's a little banged up. Haven't seen him, but I think he's going to be fine for the opener. So DK, Tyler, Jake Bobo, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, obviously, and I think Laviska Shenault has cemented himself a position on this team, and you can make an argument, one of the better 5th receivers in the league because of his ability in the return game, his ability to run after the catch, the way we've already seen the team use him in preseason, sometimes out of the backfield, his blocking ability. And then I have them keeping a 6th receiver for a couple of reasons. One is with the new kickoff return rules, I think they're looking for guys that can be dynamic in that part of the game, which is another place where I think if they choose to use McIntosh there, maybe a little bit of an advantage over Holani with his cutback ability. Now, up until this week, I had Derek Young as the 6th receiver. I just think he's been healthy this preseason. He's a guy that was out there running with 1s and 2s all throughout early preseason. But he just hasn't done anything really to stand out. And the guy that keeps making plays over and over and over again and has for 2 straight preseasons now is Easop Winston Jr. Catches the ball in traffic, runs really good routes, outstanding special teamer, and a guy that can really help in the return game. We saw them give Young some reps in the return game, the kick return game with the new rules. I don't think that he stood out as well. And Winston can also return punts. I just think he's a guy, and the coaches, some of the things that Mike Macdonald and the coaching staff said about Winston and how hard he works and everything that he shows, every day he shows up on the practice field, that sounded like the way coaches talk about players that they want to keep around. Now, can you get Winston through to the practice squad again? Probably. You could probably get any of these guys through. In which case, that could be where you rob from if you want to try to protect McIntosh and Holani. Maybe you keep those 4 running backs. You just keep the 5 receivers. I think all of those other receivers make it through waivers, and then you bring them back in the practice squad and elevate them on game day. That could be where that comes from. But I'm just putting Winston there because of the comments from the coaches and how high they seem to be on him and his performance on the field. Guy just keeps making plays. Tight end, I've got the 4. Noah Fant, Farrell Brown, Brady Russell, A.J. Barner. What we don't know, how healthy is Farrell Brown? Seahawks signed a couple undrafted tight ends this week. Haven't added those to the list yet because I think if Brown is hurt, it would be Mabry or potentially Westover, who's been banged up a little bit lately. But I think in that case, we did see Brown went and saw a specialist earlier this week. We saw him post on his Instagram. He was doing some foot exercises and kind of jumping around on his feet. So that's positive. Maybe he's not going to be out very long. and we don't need to add a fourth tight end. I also think that we have seen enough from Brady Russell as a blocker, in addition to his skills in the passing game, that he had cemented a spot on this roster anyway. But I think he can help make up for some of that Brown gave you. They like his ability in line. And then what the rookie AJ Barner out of Michigan has shown and his ability to block, he looks like a guy that can step in right now and be that dude helping you in the run game. And so I think those are the four, kind of no matter what, unless Brown is going to be out for any length of time. I don't think he would be an IR guy, but maybe we'll get clarity on that in the next couple of days. I think those are your four. Offensive line is where it gets really tricky. They usually keep some combination of 10 spread out throughout the three positions. I think last year, based on my numbers here, it was 9. Obviously, the big question heading into this week was going to be, do we get clarity on Abe Lucas's situation? I said earlier in the week he had to practice this week if there was any chance he was going to play week 1. Not only is he not practicing, but when asked about it yesterday, Mike Macdonald said, I probably shouldn't answer that. Are they being coy? I don't think so. I think if they thought that Abe Lucas had a chance to be out there week 1, he would have to be practicing. He's basically been off from football activities for the better part of a year and a half. And so I'm moving forward with the idea that he's going to stay on the pup list, have to miss the first 4 games of the season. And so how do you fill out the rest of that offensive lineman roster? Last year, they kept 4 tackles, kind of technically, although some guys could swing, 3 guards, 2 centers. This year, I've got them keeping 3 guards, but 1 can play tackle. 4 guards, and 3 tackles. Charles Cross, obviously, at tackle. George Fant signed as insurance for Abe Lucas not being able to play. But also, I think he would have made sense even if they thought Lucas was going to come back healthy, because he was an upgrade over what we've had as a backup left tackle in Stone Forsythe the last couple of years. Maybe Fant doesn't come back here if Lucas is 100%. And he finds another opportunity where there's more playing time to be given. But it would have made sense anyway. He can play both spots. So Cross, Fant, and then I really struggled with what to do next at tackle. But Clendon Curtis has been the guy playing right tackle in Lucas's place. He has struggled at times in pass protection. I've talked about how I don't like his footwork, although I thought it was better against the Titans than it was against the Chargers. But in the run game, especially against the Titans, like he was trucking guys and really moving people. And the combination of him and Bradford on the right side, pretty devastating in the run game. And we saw that pay off on some of those Kenny McIntosh runs. He's a lock for the roster because he can play guard and he can play tackle. And he seems to be, at this point, the second choice behind Fant at right tackle. But I still have him listed as a guard here because that's just what he's played up until this point. And then at guard, Bradford's a lock, Haynes a lock, Laken Tomlinson, I think, is a lock. There was some speculation over the last week and a half because Christian Haynes had been playing some more left guard in preseason games and playing well, that maybe they don't need Tomlinson. They can cut him and save a little bit of money. I think the way that the team has managed his practice reps and also spoken about his leadership ability, his impact in this offensive line as one of the few veterans there, and all his experience, and the fact that he's put some good reps on tape when he has played so far this preseason, I think he's a lock. And then Curtis. And then what do you do with that last spot? That's where I really, really wrestled with this, because Forsythe still makes a lot of sense. We've seen good and bad from him over the last couple of years. Ironically, his strength coming out in the draft was supposed to be pass protection and needed work in the run game. He has struggled some in pass protection on the edge in the last couple of years. But he's a guy that is a natural left tackle, but stepped in and played some right tackle last year with the injury to Lucas and even Jason Peters. I just think the upside the team sees in Mike Jarrell, the way they talk about how pleased they are with his performance this offseason, and the upside there as a guy that could potentially develop into a long-term starting right tackle on a team that might need a young, long-term starting right tackle to be in the picture, that upside might get him claimed. And that this is one of those spots where, Forsythe is 27, 28 years old now, coming off a couple of so-so seasons. He would cost a higher veteran minimum if you signed him. That maybe Forsythe's a guy that can get through waivers, and they'd be a little worried about Jarrell being claimed, much in the same way that the Seahawks did last year with O'Neal and Curtis. And so I've got Michael Jarrell making the team. I wanted to find a way to protect Satawa Lamea as well because I love his potential upside in the future. I just think he's a guy that's probably going to make it through, and it will be one of the primary re-signings on the practice squad. There's other guys in the picture. I would think that they'll really try to get Garrett Greenfield back in the practice squad as well as potentially Raekwon O'Neal. But that's what I'm going with. It's tempting to keep Forsyth, and it wouldn't surprise me if they do that instead. But I think the risk of losing Jarrell is one that they're going to want to protect themselves from. And then center, it's provided he's ready to go and ready to play week 1. And we've seen him in practice reps this week. He won't play Saturday. It doesn't sound like, and that would seem unreasonable to think that he would. But it seems like Connor Williams might be on track to be the starting center week 1. That is still crazy to me, 9 months after ACL surgery. And then Olu Oluwatimi. And then I really like what I've seen from Jalen Sundell, the former North Dakota State University left tackle, who also has played some center. I think he's looked really good at center. I think he's a very similar athletic profile to Williams. And that might have some appeal to the Seahawks, and that's a guy that I think they would really try to get onto the practice squad. So that's my 24 on offense. What do you think of that? And then on defense, not as many upsets here, but some tough decisions. Defensive, let's just call it defensive line, 7 total. Jonathan Hankins, Byron Murphy, Miles Adams, who's had a really good preseason and has had to step up and play more of that kind of nose tackle spot with Cam Young being injured. Don't know his status. Would hope that he's ready for week 1. Certainly he's going to make the roster. It's just a question of whether he'll be injured or healthy. But I do think that this is a spot where they're going to be combing the waiver wire for potentially another veteran interior defensive tackle, maybe a guy that profiles more as a nose tackle. That's why I've got that unknown spot down there. None of the other undrafted guys have really stood out in that spot. Now, one potential solution could be Matt Gotel, who was released last week with an injury designation or an injury settlement. A lot of times those are minor injuries. We saw it last year with Jonathan Sutherland, and I think Ty Okada also, some guys that were released about this time and then signed back to the practice squad a couple weeks later when they're healthy. That could certainly be an option with Gotel if he's a guy that gets healthy sometime in the next week or two. And then Leonard Williams, obviously, Jaron Reed, Mike Morris on the outside, outside being defensive end. Those are your 7 defensive linemen, unless Cam Young can't go. And then I think they're fine. They're looking for a guy. And then your outside linebacker, I think that's pretty set. Like what we've seen from Jamie Sheriff, especially in that Titans game, but I don't know if it's not enough to make the 53-man roster over a guy like Darrell Taylor, even though I don't think he's shown much to stand out. But it's Nwosu, Hall, Mafe, Draymond Jones, provided he's healthy, and Darrell Taylor. Those are your 5. And then I'm going to come back to inside linebacker. But at corner now, there's some clarity. Mike Jackson no longer in the picture. And so really the only question to me, last year they kept 5 safeties, 5 corners. I'm going to borrow from one of those spots here, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Your 5 corners, Tariq Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, Trey Brown, and then the 2 rookies out of Auburn, Nehemiah Pritchett and DJ James. They've had rookie moments, but they've also had flashes. I don't think either of them has shown anything to indicate that, those weren't well-used draft picks. And that those guys have really provided the team with some young depth and some upside moving forward. The only real question then is Artie Burns. He has continued to be productive, look good in the slot. He can also play outside in a pinch, just 27 years old still, the former first rounder. He's a guy maybe like Mike Jackson that a team might throw you a late pick for if they have some cornerback depth concerns and want some experience. He's also a guy, though, that I think given his age and kind of uneven track record, probably passes through waivers. And if the Seahawks wanted to, even with the veteran status, remember the practice squad rules were changed a few years ago to allow you to bring back more veteran players. Burns could still be a guy that stays in the fold, but I've got those 5 as the only 5 to really be locks. And then at safety, I've got them only keeping 4. And the reason for that now is I think the other guys are going to be easy to get through to the practice squad. I'm talking about Marquise Blair, who really surprisingly coming back after 2 years away has flashed over and over in this preseason. And Ty Okada, also a guy who has had an interception against the Titans. I think those guys pass through waivers. You can get them on the practice squad and still have them available. And so I've got Julian Love, Rayshon Jenkins, Kobe Bryant, Kayvon Wallace as your 4 safeties. And by keeping only 4 safeties, it allows me to have that extra spot at linebacker. I disagree with Seaside Joe. I don't think Michael Barrett was acquired with the idea of passing him through to the practice squad. I think that he would still have some appeal to other teams. And I think he's so good on special teams and helps protect you in a spot where he's got familiarity with the scheme, because not only did he play it for a year under Mike Macdonald at Michigan and then 2 years at Michigan under Jesse Minter, same scheme, but also Tennessee. And is it Denard Wilson is the new DC's name there, right? Coached under Mike Macdonald in Baltimore, got the DC job there this year, installed the same scheme. He has tons and tons of familiarity with that. And you're hedging against Jerome Baker being fully healthy. We haven't seen it yet. Terrell Dodson had some injury issues this offseason. Tyrese Knight, inexperienced 4th-round draft pick. John Radigan's been he's been a Seahawk for 3-4 seasons now, but has some athletic limitations. I think Barrett makes the team. He's a versatile guy too. You can use him in pass rush packages. I think it makes a lot of sense to have him on the 53-man roster. Now, Patrick O'Connell has had a really good preseason as well. Griffin, I think, has called him the best coverage linebacker he's seen in the preseason for the Seahawks. But I think he's a guy you can pass through again to the practice squad. And it's interesting that we acquire Michael Barrett today, because Drake Thomas, who recently came back from his knee injury, is practicing again. He's still an interesting player to me. I hope he's able to stick around on the practice squad. But this time, about a year ago, when the Seahawks poached him away from the Raiders, I think to this day, it's still my most viewed video. Really liked the upside there. Thought he was a potential starter in the future. Kind of a similar profile to Barrett. A little under height, about the same size. Barrett, and it probably makes that a little bit redundant. And I think Barrett has a more proven track record. So Thomas, probably not really in the plans now. And then, of course, the specialists, those guys aren't changing as much as. So I cannot believe that the reaction from so many fans after the Titans game on Saturday was, we need a new kicker. He's missed an extra point in each of the 2 games. I know he's making money. I've talked about the possibility that maybe they move on from that next year. I think he has 1 year left on his deal, and save some money there and go with a rookie kicker, or at least bring in competition. I don't think Jason Myers is going anywhere, guys. I think his job is safe for now. And then Michael Dixon and Chris Stoll, the long snapper. So that's my 53. I don't think there's any real shocking surprises there, but let me know what you guys think. But yeah, that's it's been a big day for the Seahawks. And on top of all that, I haven't even mentioned the fact, and so I will shortly or briefly before I leave you today. We heard from Pete Carroll for the first time on Tuesday. He got on with Dave Softy Mahler on KJR, as well as Doug Baldwin. And it was the first time we'd heard extended comments from him, certainly in the Seattle market, since he was fired. And one thing that became obvious, a couple of my takeaways from that conversation, is that, there were a lot of people that were hanging on to this idea that the analyst title that was given to him when he was fired was more than just ceremonial, that he would actually have some say in how the Seahawks roster is put together and in decisions that are made, and that they would be calling him up for his advice, that he might even have an office at the VMAC. I never, from the moment that happened, never saw it as anything other than just figurehead, ceremonial type, being kind to a legend and allowing him to go out as much on his terms as you can when you're getting fired. And so he did say, when he was asked if he had any contact with those guys, and he said, other than a brief meeting in the parking lot between he and Mike Macdonald, he says, nope, haven't talked to those guys. And when you first saw the comments in print, it kind of sounded a little bit dismissive, but when you listen to the interview, it's classic Pete Carroll. He was being gracious. He was just being straightforward. He's got a lot of stuff on his plate right now, a lot of different options that he's pursuing. And he said, that's the way it should be. And I wouldn't expect anything else from Pete Carroll. Like, that's the way it should be, for him to say that, hey, I'm not, I had my legacy. This is a new coach trying to forge his and build a culture. Who am I to go step on his toes and try to muscle my way into the spotlight to try and stay around and stay relevant, stay in the picture. So I thought that was just classic Pete Carroll, class and tact all the way through. I thought the other takeaway from that interview is, while he essentially said never say never, I think we've seen the last of him as a football coach. There was really no reported interest in him after he was fired in any of the coaching cycles. I don't think another year older, what will he be, 73 next year, that he would have appealed to teams. He did mention he's going to take a teaching position at USC, and I think that's a fantastic way for him to go. He has so much to give and so much to teach in so many ways. He didn't mention specifically what he'll be teaching, but I imagine it has something to do with personal development and, being the best you that you can be, because that's really, for all of his acumen and knowledge about the game of football, obviously, that's what made Pete Carroll so great. So it was really, really cool to hear from him. And I do think at some point, maybe the contract needs to officially expire after the end of this year. Maybe year 2 of the Mike Macdonald era, especially if the year 1 goes really well, makes more sense. You bring him back, you put him in the Ring of Honor, maybe even before any of the other players from his era, you have him raise the flag, you do all of that. The time will come for that. That time is just not now. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring this episode. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that bell for future notification. And then again, if you have any trouble listening to the audio episodes over the next day or two, just hang in there. They should populate soon thereafter. But there should be no other changes in the way that you view the show, as I'm now a member of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. I will be doing a live reaction show. I know I said earlier I was going to wait till Sunday morning. At this point, my plan is to come back after the game. I'll be attending the game, come back, do a live reaction show to what we saw on the field on Saturday, and then stay tuned Sunday, Monday as cuts happen. I will do reactions to those. Likely those will be live. So again, another reason to set notifications so that when I go live, so that you can be involved and you can comment, and you can ask questions, and we can have that give and take. I can show it on the screen, and we can do it together. Lots going to be happening over the next week, and then I've got some really cool surprise guests lined up for week 0, that week off before the Seahawks open the season at home against the Denver Broncos. And to end the show on one final piece of news, we also found out this week for certain that Bo Nix, the rookie quarterback out of Oregon, will be under center week 1 against the Seahawks at home at Lumen Field. The first time the Seahawks have ever faced a rookie starting QB in week 1. We still haven't heard from New England yet. Sounds like they might be trending and leaning towards starting Drake May. We may be facing rookies the first 2 weeks of the season. I hope you caught up with all of that today. Thanks again for watching and all your support for the show. I really appreciate it, each and every one of you. Thanks again to Dave for buying me some coffees, my #1 supporter. All the different ways you can support the show down below. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks.
Just decided to